So in this segment, we're going to be talking a bit about Andy Burnham, kind of talking a bit of rubbish, really. I think. I don't think what he's saying is very intelligent. I did give Andy Burnham some plaudits last year when he fought quite hard for Manchester. But to be fair, as the mayor, he kind of did the bare minimum, which was, push aggressively for the Tories to give a proper furlough amount to people in Manchester when the Tories pushed them into local lockdown, because the Conservative government were offering like 60% when the national amount was around 80% during the lockdowns. So yeah, I gave him a lot of credit, probably more than I should have done, but at least he was saying something, unlike a certain other Labour politician who has a leadership role. But Andy Burnham saying the UK needs to embrace Brexit as a new reality. And to be fair, he's not 100% wrong, but the thing is, there are areas where we do need to work with the EU to resolve certain issues, such as with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'm not talking about taking unilateral action. What I'm talking about is looking at where we can get SPS agreements and things like that in order to help exports. So we look at what Andy Burnham has been saying, which is people are embracing the fact that this is a new reality, talking about Brexit now in the UK, and I think that's the way everybody needs to embrace it. But the thing is, right, we're talking about what kind of Brexit still, even outside the EU, what kind of Brexit are we going for? Is it one where we're going to have a race to the bottom, a proper Tory Brexit, a race to the bottom, deregulation on certain things, letting Northern Ireland go, potentially letting Scotland go because of our actions? Is that the kind of Brexit we want, Andy? Because there are still different kinds of Brexit, even now. We can still have high standards. We can have SPS agreements with the EU. We can look at things like equivalency and alignment. So let's not pretend that, this Brexit thing is still, binary, or there are very limited options here. There are still different kinds of paths the UK can follow, and Andy Burnham didn't really talk about that, at least not from what I've seen in this article. He goes on to say, but the way people will approach things is to be true to Manchester's international perspective on life. It's European roots that you've kind of turned against, and you've berated things like freedom of movement. We want to carry on working with our partners and find a way of making Brexit work for our communities. But how are you going to do that, Andy? Burnham also said Brexit had exposed a wide divide between UK regions, which is true, but I feel like the pandemic has done that far more aggressively. But we already knew there was a north-south divide. We already knew that. Brexit hasn't exacerbated it that much. If anything, it's brought the south down a fair bit, because in places like London, we've lost a lot of financial services. So in all my life, having spoken out for the north of England in Parliament, I've never seen regional inequalities as the top issue in British politics. Well, it is now. I mean, George Osborne's always talked about a northern powerhouse, and you talk about inequalities in the north being a top issue in British politics. I don't think that's the case. But how has Brexit helped the north of England? Because all of those farmers now are going to get screwed by the Australian deal. A lot of fishermen in the north of England, as well as the south, have been screwed by the Brexit deal. So how has Brexit actually helped us talk about northern issues more? We could have always had resolved northern issues whilst we were part of the EU. The EU even helped certain poorer areas that are also in the north of England through EU schemes, that they actually gave direct funding to these places that were impoverished. And now you're saying, we need to embrace Brexit and blah, 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 when the Conservatives have cut these subsidies to these places. Should we embrace that as well, Andy Burnham? This guy, he said the time for rejoining the EU has gone, and keeping Scotland inside the Union was now a priority. Riddle me this, yeah? One of the main reasons why Scotland remained a part of the Union was because they were told that if they had left the Union, they would not be accepted into the EU. So how can you, on the one hand, embrace Brexit and then tell us that we need to keep Scotland a part of the Union, when one of the reasons Scotland wants to leave the Union is to rejoin the EU? Like, how do you square the circle, Andy? Like, this is such a ridiculous statement. I think it's more of an internal debate that is going to go on in this country now about how do we get regional equality, rather than everyone talking about how quickly we can rejoin the EU. How are we going to get regional equality? Well, we can look at some of the schemes the EU used to help impoverish areas. We can also look at how the EU used subsidies to help certain industries that may or may not be in the north of England, EU subsidies to farmers, etc. But I don't think you are the guy to actually offer us right solutions here, because I don't think you really know most of the issues. And you could say I'm an arrogant southerner. Northampton is just about in the south of England, but I don't see him offering that much. Do you? That's gone, I'm afraid, maybe for now or maybe forever, talking about rejoining the EU. Now it's about how does this union of the UK hold together, because it could break down with things that are happening in Scotland, and that's predominantly down to Brexit, my friend. So you're saying embrace Brexit, but one of the main reasons Scotland wants to leave is because of Brexit. You're not making sense, Andy. You're really not. The former Labour minister said the political system in Westminster was to blame for the North-South divide in the UK. That is true to an extent, but having the SNP in charge, in Scotland does help Scotland in a couple of ways. They have free prescriptions, and I think they have free university. I'm not 100% sure on that one. So he's right, devolution can help to an extent, but the thing is, the more you devolve things and the more you give power away, the more likely these groups are to say, oh, look, we can do things better than you guys, we want to leave. That's one of the main successes, I think, of having a government inside Scotland, which is the Scots are saying, look, we can run things better than the English are up here. We can actually look at properly investing within our services and really helping people. Look at, the North Sea oil, do what Norway has done and turn it into a sovereign fund. These are things that devolution has helped with. So, Andy's argument of devolution helping other parts of England does ring true. Other parts of the UK. But the thing is, eventually these people will start thinking, we can run it better than you guys. And that's what's happened in Scotland. He said, I'm afraid the 80s were grim in this part of the UK where the traditional industry has left, and there seems to be a view that we could fund the whole country via the City of London and the service economy, and that's been really difficult. But I think we are not just emerging out of it. British politics is too London-centric. Well, Andy, you might have got your wish power because the City of London has been crippled by Brexit. I don't know where these services are going to go, but it's not going to go up to Manchester, buddy. Now we have a government that says it wants to level up the UK. We will see. But, it's a big job because it's still a case that simple things like public transport cost so much more in my city than they do in London, which he's true, and he's spoken about that a lot. Transport in other parts of the UK is far more expensive than London, partly because London has a very different system to the rest of England, and that's something that we could look at resolving. But Andy, we could have done that whilst being a member of the EU. We would have had a lot more money to spend on these things, on these projects, like levelling up our infrastructure. Now a lot of our money's gone down to Brexit. So we could have done these things as a member of the EU. You can argue that these things have come more to the forefront because of Brexit, but these are things that a Labour government could have pushed on. So the arguments he makes here are just stupid. How could that possibly be right? Because London has got a mayor 20 years ago, and all the governments have funded London and the Olympics and all those things, which is true. London, the UK focuses far too much on London. But how does Brexit help that? How does Brexit help us look at places like Manchester? All it's going to do is make the life in those places more difficult. We've already seen manufacturing leave Sunderland. We've seen some of the Japanese car makers left Sunderland. So how are you going to help them, Andy, by embracing Brexit? Because all you're doing is creating more problems for these places. This is just ridiculous. I know I'm saying that word a lot, but it is. He added, we are a very uneven country. In fact, we are the most politically over-centralised country in the OECD, with all the power vested in Westminster, but also one of the most regionally unbalanced. I think all these things are connected. You put all the political power in one place, it tends to benefit that place more than it does anywhere else. But Andy, Brexit has given more powers to the Westminster government. So the arguments you're making here are just ridiculous, and this government are very unlikely to give up more powers to devolved regions. They already want to change the voting system in mayoral races to help their own party out. So, Andy, you're talking absolute rubbish. Honestly, talking about we can focus on leveling up parts of the north. Well, how are we going to do that when the country has less money than it had pre-Brexit? I'm not talking about the pandemic. The pandemic would have already been an issue. But when it comes to recovery, we are going to have issues. And people can argue that, our recovery is doing really well. But when you fall down so much like the UK has, any kind of jump is going to look very dramatic. Let's look at it over the long term, over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and see how much better the UK is looking. Because the deals we're signing now, we've lost massive amounts of trade with the EU in terms of exports. And we're going to sign deals with countries like Australia that are worth 0.01% of GDP. How is that going to help our economy grow, Andy? You're so desperate to keep Scotland within the Union, a union which they might not want to stay in, but by embracing Brexit more and chasing more deals with countries with lower standards than us, all you're going to do is push Northern Ireland faster out of the Union. Do you not care about keeping Northern Ireland in the Union, Andy? Clearly by the looks of things, you don't. George Osborne constantly talked about the Northern Powerhouse and things like that. Nothing ever came of it. We got Andy kind of talking about, the red wall seats would have been safe under him if he beat Corbyn as leader, making a lot of statements here. Greater Manchester Andy Burnham has claimed that Labour would not have suffered such a historic election defeat if he had picked him as leader rather than Corbyn. But the thing is, you might have done slightly better. But what's the difference between an 80-seat majority and say a 50-seat majority? Not much. It's still a massive majority. Maybe if you got the majority down to 10 or 15, you could have a case here, Andy. But realistically, you don't. The thing that Andy Burnham is doing here, he's posturing and saying that, look, if we get rid of Starmer, I'll take the spot, because he is quite popular now. He wasn't that popular in the party when he was an MP. He's looking a lot more popular now as Mayor of Manchester. He's saying, if there comes a point where it is clear to me that the Labour Party, having not thought of me right twice, because he lost in 2010, he lost in 2015, thinks, well, actually, you probably are now, because of the way the world has changed, then as I say, I will put myself forward to lead the Labour Party. Mr. Burnham just won 19% of the 2015 leadership contest, while Corbyn was elected with 59%. So, he's second-term mayor. He's reinvented his image quite a lot, but I don't think he's the guy. Yvette Cooper has also thrown her name into the hat of potential leaders if we get rid of Starmer. But, he would have, if you look at the kind of voter percentage, Labour hemorrhage votes in Leave and Remain places. So it's very possible that if we had Andy Burnham in charge, maybe that kind of strong Leave vote goes down a bit. But it wouldn't go down much because you still had to compete with the Brexit Party, which tried to kind of portray itself as a right-wing populist party, as well as the Conservatives who tried to do similar. And even in strong Leave seats, the Lib Dems actually picked up votes because their last results were really bad. And in strong Remain seats, Labour lost a lot of votes. So, we hemorrhaged votes to the Lib Dems and to the Greens, which would have happened far more. And yeah, you can argue he might have won seats like Wakefield, which the Labour Party lost out by a few thousand. But, it's very unlikely you would have won really aggressive seats like Great Grimsby, which voted massively for the Conservative Party. I doubt he could have bridged an 8,000, this kind of gap here. But also, he would have lost seats like Canterbury. In the south, Labour just about winning that seat, and the Lib Dems, Labour would have hemorrhaged votes to the Lib Dems and to potentially the Independent Party, depending on which way they were running. So the argument Andy Burnham makes is not very strong when it comes to him saying that we would have kept red wall seats, because certain red wall seats you would have lost, like Great Grimsby. And if we actually look at a speech Andy Burnham made in 2016, it's he would have kept these seats by using Brexit kind of right-wing populism. That's what he would have done. He's using, in this speech, he uses a lot of right-wing talking points. And, we're going to give this a listen. I'm going to tell you why Andy Burnham is making very stupid arguments that bashes EU migrants that come to this country to work.
Has to be our starting point in this debate. The status quo, full free movement, was defeated at the ballot box. And free movement does not affect all places in the same way.
He's right, places like major cities are impacted more by freedom of movement because that's typically where a lot of jobs are. We've seen that because EU workers and EU staff have refused to come back to the UK post-pandemic, there are massive vacancies in places like London because that's where the vacancies are. And these aren't just in skilled jobs, as Andy would have you believe. Some of these jobs are skilled. I'm not saying unskilled versus skilled. I'm talking about lower skills that you can train people up quicker for compared to higher skills like being a head chef, being a front of house, head of the front of house, etc. Some of the arguments that Andy makes here are just so stupid.
It affects cities differently from former industrial areas, and it has made life more difficult in places where it is already hardest. These are areas which the government could actually help, by the way, areas that already hit pretty hard. These are things the government could have done if they wanted to. Which got no real help from the government when traditional industry left, which saw house prices collapse and whole streets bought up by absent private landlords.
That's something the government could have stopped as well if they put a cap on how many houses people could own. So a lot of the problems Andy Burnham talks about here could easily be fixed by a government that wants to fix them. But instead he throws immigrants under the bus.
They are places which, alongside new arrivals from the EU, continue to take in the vast majority of the country's asylum seekers and refugees.
So not only has Andy thrown under the bus migrants from the EU, but he's also thrown under the bus refugees and asylum seekers by saying that these areas are hit so hard because of the fact that they have an influx, they have been impacted by deindustrialization of the UK, but also the fact that they are taking in so many refugees and so many workers from the EU. So he's throwing these people under the bus and not offering actual solutions that could have saved these areas. Instead, he's deciding to throw vulnerable people and people who are, according to him at least, on lower wages under the bus. That's what Andy's doing.
And largely they do so without any real strife or difficulty. So I don't want to hear, Madam Deputy Speaker, anyone claim that people in places like Lee that voted to leave are in any way xenophobic or racist.
I don't know, man. Some of these places are a bit xenophobic and racist. Maybe not most of them, maybe not even most of the Brexit voters, but the racists and xenophobes majority voted for Brexit. So this argument again he's making here, saying that, you don't say these people are racist because they're taking in loads of asylum seekers and refugees. Like, have you asked all of the people in this town, is that what they want?
Free movement has arguably been providing greater benefit to large companies than it has to the most deprived communities. There is nothing socialist about a system of open borders that allows multinationals to treat people as commodities and move them around Europe to drive down labour costs and create a race to the bottom.
So, again, this argument here, if you are so worried about labour costs, you can push for an increase in wages. It's not very difficult, Andy. Again, all of these problems he's offering, there are solutions to. You could push for things like a living wage, which would keep wages higher. But instead, in this speech, he doesn't, does he? And not to mention the fact that I wasn't the one who cut and edited this speech. It was him. This is from his official Twitter page.
Second, there is a strong case for saying that the immigration system that has developed in this country over time is inherently discriminatory. It does not treat all migrants equally. Instead, it accords a preferential status to migrants from our nearest neighbours in the context of a policy that seeks to cap numbers. That therefore discriminates those non-EU migrants who seek to come here and who have families here.
So again, not the best argument from Andy. I think countries typically do this with neighbouring countries. They do have easy access for their neighbours to travel and work and whatever in their countries, okay? You're talking about the discrimination of non-EU migrants and talking about how difficult it is to get a visa, right? You could change these rules in order to stop this. You could have pushed the government to change these rules, but the main reason the government had an aggressive stance towards non-EU migrants is because they had ridiculous immigration figures that they wanted caps on, which didn't work. Also, the fact that non-EU immigration has gone up dramatically compared to EU immigration. So Andy must be happy, right? Andy must be happy about it.
My call tonight to this side of the House is to put forward a plan that treats all people equally and applies progressive principles to migration. We need to make the argument for an immigration system that allows for greater control, reduces the numbers coming here, but does so in a fair way. A system that treats all migrants equally, that doesn't allow people's wages to be undercut, as my honourable friend said.
If you're so concerned about wages being undercut, raise the goddamn wages, Andy. Push for an increase in wages.
Crucially, continues to welcome people from Europe and around the world to work here. These are
because that's what more people in this country want, more brown and black faces, honestly. It wasn't that long ago, Andy, that people my skin colour were getting kicked about. Yeah, EU migrants were the ones thrown under the bus this time round, but I guarantee you when this stuff goes wrong, they're going to look at people like me and blame me for the problems, honestly.
Progressive principles which can form the basis of a new immigration policy for the left.
I mean, we could focus on a new immigration policy that doesn't, that is fairer to people from around the world. But this is something that a lot of other countries do, where they have systems in place for their neighbours for them to, more easier come into the country to work and to live. And he didn't offer many socialist solutions, did he? He didn't offer an increase in wages. He didn't offer things like reduction in agency work and things like that. Some of these agencies do look abroad to get people into the country to work. These are the things that can be changed. You can make work more secure for people, less 0 hours contracts. But in this speech, in this 2 minutes and 19-second speech, how many left-wing solutions did Andy offer for the problems he was talking about? Probably one, you could argue, a change to the immigration system. That's about it. And now, what we're seeing is the country's screwed because we have ridiculously high standards for people who want visas to come to work here. I think you need to make about £23,000, right? So not only are you going to have issues getting in non-EU citizens to work in the UK, but you're going to have issues with getting EU citizens now to work in the UK because of these visa problems. So Andy, well done, mate, because if we followed policies that you wanted to, which we actually have done, we're going to make it much more difficult for people to come to this country who actually have the skills to work and fill the jobs that we have, fill the vacancies that we have. So well done, Andy. You're a massive fraud, mate. If this is the way you would have hung on to the red wall seats, then fair play, mate. You would have basically followed the footsteps of the Brexit party. That's what you'd have done in the majority of these talking points. If you're worried about the problems with housing, with schools, with doctors, those are things the government could resolve if the government wanted to. And instead of resolving these issues, because that would have put the blame at the government, which was David Cameron, he allowed the blame of citizens from the EU. And in doing so, he allowed this, xenophobia and hatred to breed, when the majority of the country's problems have and always will be from the Westminster government and no one else. You cannot blame anyone else. And the only good thing about Brexit now is it puts the Westminster government more in the firing line. And when voters keep voting in stupid people like Boris Johnson, Theresa May and David Cameron, it puts the blame more onto the British public that we are idiots and we keep voting in people who are stupid. And, people like Andy can talk all day about, I would have got the red wall seats and all this blah, blah, blah. Mate, you've given a whole speech that could have been done by someone like Nigel Farage. So, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with this guy. If he wants to be Labour leader, then fine, have at it. But I don't think he's going to do that well with people with non-British citizens. Sort of EU, sort of UK. I don't even know how to explain it. I don't think he's going to do well with foreign people, basically, with non-white citizens. I don't think he's going to resonate that well. Especially in a broader scope of the UK, I don't think, given the fact that he's a northerner, I don't think he'll do that well when it comes to running in an election. But this is just ridiculous. The idea that we're going to keep the union together by embracing Brexit is just so stupid. All you're going to do is push away Northern Ireland and Scotland. The idea that he would have kept more red wall seats is probably true, but he would have struggled in the south. Labour did struggle in the south, but I think he would have struggled far more. And, the arguments he's making here are just ridiculous. But look, I'm going to leave it there. This video's gone on for a long time. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And, Manchester only has one great Andy now. And that's Andy Tate. No one else. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.